My name is Nurajla Azidavitia Mustaqim. We are going to do a short video of short story analysis for introduction of literature. Okay.
Before I start, imagine a beautiful golden statue standing high above a city, covered in gold, with shining jewels for eyes, admired by everyone. Today, we will be sharing with you The Happy Prince by Oscar Wilde. Oscar Wilde was a famous Irish poet, playwright, and novelist. He was best known for his wit and meaningful works. The Happy Prince was first published in 1888 in a collection of children's tales. The story is about a golden statue of a prince. When he was alive, he used to live in luxury and never saw suffering. But now, as a golden statue, he could see the pain and poverty of the people. He meets a little swallow, and together they help the poor. The prince gives away his gold and jewels, and the swallow delivers them to those in need. But in the end, the prince loses its beauty, and the swallow dies in the cold. But both are rewarded in heaven for their sacrifices.
Every story needs a plot. Plot is a structure of series of events that happens in a story. In Freytag's triangle, it shows a visual presentation of a story structure, like this. In the short story of The Happy Prince, it starts with the exposition. It introduces the character, settings, and the potential conflicts. The exposition started when they introduces the character, which is the statue of the Happy Prince stood high above the city, covered in gold, and the swallow who were resting on the statue's feet on his way to Egypt. And the swallow realized that the statue was crying. Then, in the rising action, the prince sees suffering throughout the city and asks the swallow to help. He said, "Little bird, will you take my red jewel to her? I cannot move from here." The swallow gave a red jewel to a mother and a son, a blue eye to a writer, and another eye to a little girl. And he stayed even though the winter is coming, staying beside the prince to help him every night. Moving on to the climax. This is the turning point of the story where the character faces the biggest challenge. The climax, this is the most emotional part, where the prince cannot see anymore since he has gave both of his blue-eye jewel to the people who in need. The prince finally asked the bird to leave for Egypt, but the bird insisted to stay on his side. "I'm not going to Egypt," said the bird. "I am going to the house of death." The bird died at the prince's feet after giving everything and stayed for the winter. Eventually, the prince's leaden heart breaks in two. The consequences of the climax or the falling action is when the townspeople see the statue is ugly and decided to remove it. The heart of the prince did not melt in the fire, and they thrown away the bird's dead body and the heart of the prince. We can see that the tension is reduced and the story is coming to an end. Eventually, the characters find solutions for their problem. Lastly, we have resolution, or also known as denouement, in which this part, the conflict is completely resolved. "Bring me the two best things in the city," said God. And so they brought him the broken heart and the dead bird. Yes, you have brought me the right things," said the God. So how the story ends, or the resolution, is God takes both of these things to heaven as a reward for their love and sacrifice. Now, without the plot and Freytag's triangle, we may not convey the theme or the meaning and won't keep us as the reader to keep engaging from the story. Thus, having the plot and structure in the story is important to drive the story forward.
The narrator knows the feelings and thoughts about the multiple characters. This perspective allows the reader to understand the contrast between the wealth and the poverty and the convention of the happy prince and the swallow. I will explain about the point of view of the story. This story is based on the third-person omniscient point of view. The story is told by a narrator who is not a character in the story but knows everything. So now, for the setting of the story, the first one, we have the city. This city is the central backdrop of the story. This is where the statue of the Happy Prince stands above the city. Also, the rich lives in their houses, parties, while the poor is located under the bridges and besides the streets. Next, we have the statue of the Happy Prince. This is where the Happy Prince interacts with the birds, the swallow. The third one is the poor woman's house. A poor woman lives there sewing dresses for the queen's ladies. Next, the palace. A queen ladies live there for whom the poor seamstress work for. The last one is the young writer's room. A tiny room that is located at the top of the building where the young writer, cold and hungry, trying to finish his story.
Hello guys, my name is Noor Karabatusha binti Abdullah and I will be explaining the characters and characteristics of the Happy Prince. Based on the story, I think that the Happy Prince is most suited for the protagonist for how he was a real prince who lived a life of luxury and ignorance of the sufferings, then became a statue and felt sad with the townspeople suffering and decided to ask the swallow for help since he can't move himself to give away all his gold and jewels to help the poor. He was a central character in the story that often faced challenges with the townspeople's sufferings, drove the plot forward, and often experienced change or growth. Next would be the swallow since he originally wanted to rest at the statue before heading to Egypt with his friends. Even though he was reluctant, he became the statue's messenger and delivered golds and jewels to those in need. He soon decided to stay with the statue to take care of the city and died with him. The reason I chose the swallow was for the character development, as the swallow had a dynamic character who underwent significant internal development, often evolving as the story progresses. Antagonists, on the other hand, would be the society's cruelty towards the townspeople's sufferings. They oppose the protagonist and creates conflict, as well as obstacles, and became the main source of tension in the story. They lack a sense of appreciation and kindness towards the statue of the Happy Prince after he was seen as unhappy, poor, and not as bright, soon dismissing the dead bird. There was also a part where the guard nearby the gate was chasing away the poor children for they were starving and could not feed themselves. What made it worse was how the rich, on the other hand, ignored the sufferings of the poor. As for the supporting characters, it will be the little girl selling eggs who dropped her eggs by accident and was scared to go home to an abusive father. She then received one of the princess' sapphire eyes. Then the seamstress mother who must tend to a princess for a dance by knitting her dress while having a son who was very ill. They were given a ruby for the hard work and sacrifice given just for the sake of the son's condition. Next would be the writer who was about to finish his story but could not due to lack of food and firewood. He was then given another sapphire eyes of the statue to buy the necessities. The last one would be the god who seeks for two of the most precious things in the city, and when given the broken heart of the prince, as well as the swallow, he confirms that it was the right items, symbolizing the story's moral and spiritual message.
"Bring me the two most precious things in the city," said God to one of his angels. And the angel brought him the leaden heart and the dead bird. "You have rightly chosen," said God. "For in my garden of paradise this little bird shall sing forevermore. And in my city of gold the happy prince shall praise me."
As for the characteristics, let's head over for the two protagonists, the Happy Prince and the Swallow. First, for the Happy Prince, he was considered as deeply empathetic and sorrowful for the suffering of others and the townspeople. He was also covered with gold leaf and had sapphire eyes. Eventually, he stripped off all of them, appearing dull, broken, unhappy, or poor, as said by the townspeople that are mostly the antagonists. The swallow, on the other hand, he was a small bird with swift wings. He grew weaker as winter approaches, and eventually he died on the statue of the Happy Prince. He was initially self-centered and pleasure-seeking. However, gradually he became loyal and loving. towards the townspeople and also the prince himself. He was then able to learn the true value of kindness and sacrifice. Then, let's move on to the antagonist. As for the antagonist, which is the society's cruelty, we can see that they are represented by mostly rich people, city officials, and the mayor himself. They all had lavish homes, fine clothing, and superficial beauty. However, as for the emotional traits, they are mostly selfish, vain, and dismissive of the true virtue. They are also apathetic towards the poor and suffering, which was why the happy prince was sad towards what was happening in the city.
The city streets are sad and dreary. Why are the people in despair? Their clothes are torn, their eyes are weary. Poverty is everywhere. And the rich just ignore it and they don't care.
As for the writer, he was living in a garret, which was a small attic room, described as having a hole in the roof. He was also seen as cold and hungry, unable to afford both firewood or food. As for the emotional traits, he was creative and ambitious. However, he could not finish his story even though he was living in a really harsh condition and environment. Then, after he was helped by the swallow, he was seen as grateful and revived when the happy prince sends him a sapphire, allowing him to buy food and firewood. That shall be all for me. Thank you.
The conflict in the Happy Prince is not fought with swords, armies, or weapons. It is something much deeper. It's a battle of the heart. Once long ago, the Happy Prince had been a real prince. When he was alive, he lived in a palace where sorrow was never allowed to enter. He was surrounded by wealth, comfort, and beauty. He never knew hunger, he never knew misery, never felt pain. Everyone around him smiled, so he smiled too. In life, he was happy because he never saw what was hidden beyond the palace gates. But death changed everything. When he was passed away, the townspeople built a statue of him, covered in gold and jewels, and placed it high above the city from this new place. Standing tall over the rooftop, he could finally see everything he had blind to before. And what was broke his heart, he saw narrow street dark and cold. He saw children shivering without shoes, mothers struggling to feed their families, and workers growing weak from endless labor. He saw hunger, he saw suffering, he saw poverty in every corner of the city. And for the first time, the happy prince felt sorrow. He wanted to help, he wanted to comfort them, to ease their pain, but there was one problem. He was stated. He cannot move. He could not step down. He could not wipe away a single tear or place food in a single hand. This is where the true conflict lies. Inside his heart burned a powerful compassion, but his body was made of stone. He was trapped between feeling everything and being able to do nothing. Then one night, a small swallow landed at his feet. The bird was resting on its way to warm land. And at the moment, the happy prince realized this little swallow could be his wing, his hand, his helper. Through the swallow, he began to give away the treasure he had been decorated with. First, he gave the ruby from his sword to a poor seamstress whose child was sick. Next, he gave a sapphire eyes to a young playwright struggling in the cold. Then, he gave away his other eye to match a girl who was being beaten by her father. Finally, he gave away the gold leaf that covered his body piece by piece until he was no longer beautiful but grey and dull. Each gift brought relief to someone in desperate need, but each gift also made him weaker, emptier, and less admired by the people who one prize is beauty. The conflict of the Happy Prince is the heart demand and the sacrifice everything even though his body was powerless. The only way to resolve this conflict was through complete selflessness, to give away all that he had until there was nothing left but love. And in the end, this is exactly what he did. He chose compassion over pride, sacrifice over comfort, love over beauty. His conflict was never about winning or losing. It was about choosing to care, even if it cost him everything. And that is why The Happy Prince remained a powerful story, because it shows us that the greatest battles are not fought with sword, but with the heart.
Now, let's get into the three main themes that Oscar Wilde wanted us to see. The first theme is selflessness and compassion. The prince gives away everything he has, his gold and jewels, for the sake of helping the poor. Even though it leaves him looking dull and broken, he doesn't regret it. And the swallow, who could have flown to Egypt for the warm winter, chose to stay with the prince. He even gave away his life for the sake of friendship and love. This shows us that true compassion means putting others before ourselves. The second theme is the contrast between the rich and the poor. From the statue, the prince could see children who are hungry, mothers who are struggling, and workers who suffer. But at the same time, the wealthy continue to live in comfort, ignoring the suffering around them. Oscar Wilde wanted us to see this unfairness. And last but not least, the third theme is true beauty. When the story begins, the statue of the prince was really admired because it was covered in gold and jewel. But after giving everything away, he looks dull, plain, and even broken. But God rewards both the prince and the swallow, proving that true beauty is not about appearance. It's about kindness, love, and sacrifices. So, these three themes make The Happy Prince more than just a fairy tale. It is a story that still speaks to us today.
One of the literary devices is imagery, where vivid descriptions appeals to the senses. As example, his eyes were bright blue jewels and a bright red jewel hung from the waist. This sentence helps the reader to visualize the stand as grand and majestic with his sparkling blue eyes and a bright red jewel hung at the waist.
One of the literary devices that are in this story is situational irony. In this story, it's when the prince is called Happy Prince, but he is actually miserable.